right. So we are officially live with Culture Forward. So I'm Rebecca Del Secco. I'm the COO of Civility Partners. I've been doing this, almost a decade, been in the culture space. And I have Nick Passavanti here with me. We've known each other for a couple of years now and really speak just the same language when it comes to culture. And he specializes really in recruiting and hiring strategy and he's with Nudge Advisors. So super excited to have you, and I'll let you introduce yourself, and then I'm going to pepper you with a bunch of questions.
Awesome. Okay. Yeah, no, thanks so much for having me. So as Rebecca mentioned, Nick Passavanti, I've spent about 15 years now helping mostly hyper-growth startups really scale and hire the best people. And so really now I do that on kind of a consultancy type basis where come in and really develop hiring strategies, right? Help people get the best fits for the role that they're looking for.
Yeah, which is so tough now. I think it just continues to get harder, or there's new things come up that you have to pivot, and so I'm sure it's exciting. It's always a challenge.
It is, and it's funny because to me, I get a lot of questions about AI and how that's affecting decision making and how that's affecting the applicant tracking process and the interview process and just kind of everything. And to me, it comes back to like the person, right? It doesn't need to be this super complicated thing. It's just like, who is this person that we're hiring, and let's get to know them. So we can talk about it.
Yeah. I've done a couple presentations for colleges. I just spoke at women's group in UCSD, and I've had a couple people reach out and ask, what are your advice for hiring? And AI inevitably comes up as, should I be using it? How are the programs working? And frankly, I can only give so much information, and it's constantly changing. I know I have a list of questions, but now I kind of want to go down this path. Like, what are you seeing?
It's, I'm seeing what I would almost describe as like robots talking to robots at this point, right? It's, candidates are using AI to build their resumes and to write their cover letters and to apply to jobs and tailor their application specifically to that job description. And, it's kind of this cat and mouse game. And then, on the hiring side, applicant tracking systems are getting better and better at screening out candidates that don't check every single box. And like I said, it's everything's just kind of being tailored. One computer is tailoring the application to exactly what the other computer wants, and it's you're kind of missing that human element.
Yeah.
And to me, it's kind of creating a lot of noise and not a lot of movement. I've been kind of trying to get people to go back to basics in a lot of cases.
Yeah. We were hiring for an executive assistant, and of course got a bunch of cover letters. And I said, well, and they all sort of said the same thing. Yeah. I said, okay. And I'm under no impressions that people aren't going to use AI as part of this. But I just said, now that it's been around for a couple of years, you can pick it up. It's like,
totally.
Yeah.
And I'm even seeing, even in interviews, right? You can tell that, some of these answers they're AI answers, right? And they've, and I get a lot of people that also ask about, they'll go to, an AI model, they'll go to ChatGPT, wherever, and they'll plug in, they'll give it a prompt of, I'm hiring for this, develop interview questions for me for this. But then the candidates are doing the same thing, right? They're saying, I'm applying to this job, I'm about to interview, what are likely questions that I'm going to get? And, again, it's almost like computers talking to computers. And so
even in the interview, it's still computers talking to computers.
And they're polishing themselves as much as they can but they're kind of just regurgitating what this language model spit out for them.
Yeah. Here's the job description. What should I ask? And here's the job description. What should I be ready to answer?
100%. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Well, on that note, how can hiring managers and recruiters use behavioral interviewing to better predict whether a candidate will, succeed within a company and the company's culture?
So, I mean, at the end of the day, you kind of have to just fall back on past behavior, right? And I think that past behavior is really, probably the strongest prediction or predictor of future behavior. And so, instead of asking, what would you do, focus on what you've actually done in real situations in the past.
Mm-hmm.
If collaboration is important, ask about conflict. If it's a sales, a sales hire for an account executive or some sort of, go to market type of role, not just, where did you rank and how did you land on your team, but what were you doing differently than other folks, on your team, right? If you were the number one person on your sales team, what were you doing different than everyone else? One question I often use is, tell me about a time when you strongly disagreed with your manager, right? And it's just a really, really good, and not that we're trying to catch candidates totally off guard, but I want to ask them questions that they're probably not anticipating, right? And I want to get kind of these true, real answers out of them. Ultimately, you've probably heard me say before, but understand the whole person, not just the resume, right? Not just their briefcase, right? The heart, the head, the mind, everything that comes with this human that you're about to bring into your office space. Because everybody, people, like we just talked about, people are going to tailor their resume from a technical standpoint. We know that they can probably do the technicalities of the role. And you should probably assess that, at some point in the interview process as well, right? A technical interview.
Yeah.
But, I think just asking the right behavioral questions. What about this? Probably my favorite interview question to ask is, based on everything you know about this role, what about this position makes you nervous, right? And it's just unbelievably telling about, how confident they actually are in their abilities versus just kind of spewing out what they think that you want to hear.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's almost the sort of the new version of tell me about your greatest weaknesses, right? Which is just, I feel is a question that we're moving away from and moving more towards the questions that, you just shared, that tell me about this, or how are you handling conflict, or those things that aren't, are good. Conflict is good. Giving feedback is good. But I think people shy away from those questions, or even thinking about those answers. Oh, I've never disagreed with my manager. I would never.
Right. And it's like, well, of course you have. We all have, right? I love asking people, like, who's your favorite boss you've ever worked for? Whether you were, babysitting, or you had a paper route when you were, 13 years old, to the job that you're in now. Who's your favorite boss, right? That answer is very telling. Why? And find that loose thread and start pulling on it, right? Kind of go down that path to, again, just understand that whole person. And then conversely, okay, so I know who your favorite boss is and why. Who's your least favorite person that you've ever worked for? Why, right? Maybe it's because somebody was a micromanager, and deep down as a hiring manager, you're going to be a micromanager. This person's probably not going to be a great fit down the road, right? And so, just trying to, like I said, suss out what this behavior is going to be like, past that honeymoon phase of the brand new job.
Yeah, I think what it makes me think of is, and the people that I've talked to, I think they're constantly looking for the right answer. What is the one correct answer? But really, when you're asking questions like, tell me about your favorite boss, or what environment you work well in, it's not necessarily a wrong answer. It's an alignment question, right? Because let's say that they answer, we'll say perfectly to this person, but they're not honest about kind of where they work best. Then down the line, they're unhappy. They landed the job, but like you said, the honeymoon phase ends, and then they're miserable.
Yeah. And that, and then, I mean, that just, it ultimately leads to turnover, right? And it's, people talk a lot about, the right hire needs to be, a fit on both sides, right? And of course that's true, but it starts, way before, the very, very first conversation that you have with a candidate. I love to ask, whether they applied or they were headhunted, but like, why are we having this conversation, right? Why are you even, maybe they're completely happy where they are, but they had that initial phone call. Why, right? There's some underlying motivator that's making them curious, right? Whether it's compensation, whether it's work-life balance, whether it's, career progression, it doesn't matter, but you want to understand what those motivations are, because, you can't manage somebody that, you're just kind of throwing darts against the wall blindfolded, right?
Yeah. And I think the one thing, so kind of pivoting a bit is, we're culture
Yeah.
consultants and really talk about how what's often missed when people come to us and there is a sort of an issue of toxicity or incivility. A lot of people are coming to us say, can you come do a training? Can
Mhm.
2 hours of let's all get along training.
Yeah.
And to our answer to which is no,
Right. Right.
because it's not going to actually move the needle. And so it opens up that conversation of, culture really, it lives in individual behavior, leadership and how they function. And then what's often missed is the organizational systems
Mhm.
that either hinder or hurt the culture that you're looking to create, or this
Right.
vision that leaders are communicating. This is our culture, and culture is important, but we have a core value of feedback, and there's no performance system. And so I
Right.
think recruiting and hiring it and then onboarding is
Yeah.
a system that is often misaligned with the culture that people are communicating or striving for.
100%.
And so I'm curious, what are the biggest mistakes that organizations make when trying to hire with culture in mind?
Yeah. I mean, I think probably the biggest mistake that I see is, so many companies, they talk about culture,
Mhm.
but, and I'm sure you see this all the time, but they never really define it. Right.
Yeah.
And they certainly don't define it in a way that can actually be
Mhm.
assessed. And, you see hiring teams relying on gut feel, right? I can't tell you how many times I've heard, well, I'll know it when I see it. Right. It's like, that's not how you do it. Right. They want there to be chemistry. Would I enjoy having a beer with this person? That's not culture. That's familiarity bias,
Mhm.
right? That's just hiring people that are like-minded. And well, there can be positives, there can be pros to hiring people that are like-minded.
Mhm.
I think the strongest organizations, they're identifying the behaviors that support their values, and then they're building interview questions around that, right? Around
Mhm.
those behaviors. They're distinguishing between a culture fit and a culture add, right? Um,
Okay.
Culture fit is alignment with, how everybody in the organization is operating, where a culture add is, new perspectives, right? New experiences.
Mhm.
What else, again, is this candidate bringing besides just their technical abilities? Because there's going to be, there's hundreds, if not thousands of people that can do the job, but it's what else sets this candidate apart from the others?
So let's go through that. I think more defining culture fit versus culture add, because I think that's such
Yeah.
an important distinction,
Yeah.
and I want to hear more about that.
Yeah, I mean, so I see, you hear it's such a buzzword, right? Like a buzz term is, it's a culture fit, it's a culture fit, it's a culture fit.
Mhm.
And you know what'll happen is if you hire everybody that's, kind of, quote unquote on the same page and operating the exact same way, and it's really interesting. There's actually case studies about this in the tech startup world where initially founders are usually hiring for culture fit, right? They're hiring for people that are willing to put those long hours in, that are willing to work for less monetary compensation, but for the RSUs and the stock options and
Mhm.
the big kind of carrot being dangled in front of them. And that aligns with the founder mindset because they usually are bootstrapping this project and they're pouring their heart and soul into it. And those companies tend to actually have um, the most liquidation events, right? They go public more often. They get acquired more often,
Yeah.
and they see kind of that early success. But then actually, once they have that liquidation event, they stalemate, right? And they kind of flatline. And it's because they've built this entire engine around essentially the same people, and they don't have a diversity of thought, right? And where you get innovation is that you have diversity of thought. And
Mhm.
so to me, culture fit is kind of hiring the same like-minded individuals. Culture add is, they I think we would all agree that they certainly have to be able to mesh with the team and
Mhm.
not be a nuisance. But at the same time, what else are they bringing to the table, right? What other experiences outside of what's bullet pointed on this job description are they adding to the team?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm curious to know more because you specialize in scaling businesses but I know from your background, you've kind of been in other experiences more established. So what do you see in terms of the differences in those strategies and building culture through, recruitment?
It's interesting. I've worked for organizations that have, very, very defined cultures.
Hmm.
Um, and I've worked with ones that, they don't have any written values, or they don't have, they don't necessarily have a culture, right? They're kind of still figuring it out, or they've never even thought it was important enough to define, right?
Hmm.
Um, but but regardless of the organization, whoever those stakeholders are, they have, in the back of their mind, certain attributes that need to be checked off, right?
Hmm.
And so it comes down to, just what's important to you, right? It goes back to the alignment to me at a very, at an intake meeting, right? A job requisition kickoff call of, what's the purpose of this job, right? How does it fit in the grand scheme of this organization, right? What is this person actually doing, and what are they contributing? Why is this job even needed? And you're going to be able to suss out a lot of kind of what's truly important versus what are the nice to haves, right? um, and I think a lot of that stems from an undefined culture and then hiring process.
Hmm. Yeah, I can imagine that step is often missing when you go in, and that's something that you implement.
Yeah, yeah. And it's, I mean, we take a really kind of holistic approach of looking at everything from, from job titles and job descriptions. And I mean, I've had clients that have, they give me a job description and there's like 48 bullet points of like must haves. And it's like, these can't, there's no way on earth that every single one of these is a requirement, right?
Mhm.
Um, and I think a lot of it just stems from, hiring managers that, most hiring managers, hiring regularly is not their main job, right? Writing a job description is not their main job. And so of course it makes sense that they're not going to be an expert in, in kind of crafting, a job description and a role itself around what's going to be attractive to candidates. But, um, I think that, um, the, I mean, even just employer branding comes into it, right? And what do you look like as an organization, to the outside, whether it's on Glassdoor or just, um, I mean, there's so many different platforms these days, and you want to be attractive, kind of to all candidates all the time.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember I was it was a couple years ago. I was doing kind of research on the misalignment around kind of job postings and employer branding, and I saw this posting around, we're really innovative and new and energetic and this, but then you go to their website and it hasn't been updated in 10
Right,
years and you're thinking, okay, where's that, like that innovative branding that I'm
right,
looking for?
right, right,
Um, and then corporate social responsibility, I think, is something that a lot more people are looking for when they are, deciding to be a part of an organization. But I think it just really goes back to the what are we actually exemplifying and what are we communicating to candidates?
right,
Because, we had a organization, they sort of nonprofit adjacent, and they had turnover. They couldn't figure out why in the first year so much turnover was happening. So we went in and we did a survey, and people were really looking for growth. They wanted more growth opportunities. They wanted to talk about their future. A lot of them were newer to the industry coming in. And then we do sort of an audit of their systems, their onboarding and all this, and get on the phone, talk to them about what we're seeing in the results. And people are asking for growth, and someone on the call says, well, we can only offer so much. Like, there's only so much we can do.
right,
Then I go to the employer value proposition that's in their onboarding and things. It says we value mentorship and growth and growing our team. And so that's okay if your growth is limited because of your
right,
industry or where you're at, but you're sort of bamboozling these people that are doing research and looking at this brand and what you're offering. And then they come in and it's not what they expected. And
right,
so,
right. And one thing, and hiring managers, of course, don't love to hear this, but sometimes it's okay to look for what I would describe as like a steady Eddie candidate, right? This is somebody that's they're not necessarily that rock star, right? They're not the A+ student, but like they get A's and B's. They do their job. They're reliable. They come in and they're not so hungry to be promoted or to move up the ladder, that as soon as the next opportunity knocks on their door, they're going to leave, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it actually makes more financial sense, because turnover costs so much money, to, like I said, hire those pretty good candidates that are going to be thrilled to be there, right? And they're going to provide you longevity and like I said, just lessen that turnover and increase retention.
Yeah. Do you feel like there's along those lines, certain misalignments that you see between hiring managers and then recruiters? I just feel like there's probably, like you said, hiring isn't their main job. And so I can see there being a lot of disconnects.
So yes, I mean, I think that, turnover is often diagnosed as a retention problem when, it's a selection problem, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, I think, you just have to be intentional and structure your process, from the very, very beginning, right? So it starts with, those intake meetings and aligning, truly aligning on, again, not just the nice to haves, but, what's the context of this role? Is this new? Is this a brand new role, or is this a backfill? If it's a backfill, why'd the person leave? What are the non-negotiables, but then what are the nice to haves? What are questions that I can ask up front, on a phone screen, that if they can't answer these, we're kicking them to the curb, but if they can, they're worthy of moving forward, right? Would you consider a candidate that maybe has, some of these bullet points, but they can, has the potential to grow into the role, right? And so, really getting that alignment as much as you can up front, which I don't think every recruiter does. I think there's kind of a stigma with a lot of recruiters that, they just kind of throw resumes over the fence, right? They throw things against the wall and see what, they're just waiting to see what sticks. And to me, that again, that ends up being a retention problem down the road, and then you're just back to square one. And so I'd much rather get aligned and limit that delta very, very early on, even with sourcing candidates, right? Let's source 20 profiles, send them to the hiring manager and say, here's what I'm thinking. I just want your feedback, right? Before I start, sprinting in the wrong direction, I want to calibrate, right?
Yeah. And typically the process really is that they're not brought in until after the screening. So you're sort of hoping that, yes, we're aligned. Maybe we have had a meeting, and then you're still working from your lens, right? And you can only open up to their lens, and then down the line, it could be, well, I don't think this is exactly what I was looking for. And then you've screened all these candidates and it's not efficient anymore.
Right.
I'm curious, like, what does a high performing hiring system, like think skills, culture, and long-term potential, like what does that look like in your mind?
Yeah. It's, I think that your a high performing hiring system looks at it like it's a business process, right? It's not a collection of interviews, right? So, we talked about, the alignment, right? Hiring teams aligning on what success actually looks like. Are the skills required today? What are the skills that are required today? What are the attributes that are going to predict, that future growth and the future opportunities? And then building an interview process around that, right? So, maybe the first interview is assessing technical abilities, right? We know that they have to be able to actually do the job, right? The day-to-day.
Step one, they can do the job.
right. Number one. But then beyond that, right? Like, let's, maybe interview 2 is evaluating collaboration, communication. What are they going to actually kind of be like to work with then, right? From a team perspective. Interview 3, maybe that's going to focus on their learning agility, right? So, what's that growth potential going to look like? Is this going to be a good candidate because we kind of envision this role growing into a senior leadership role down the road? I think, kind of defining and establishing and then interviewing around clear competencies and creating scorecards, that, you're not only hiring people who have kind of those mandatory skills that we talked about, but also, they can demonstrate the ability to be adaptable. They're coachable. They have those company, and culture values. And, ultimately, it's not just kind of, do we like this candidate? It's, have they demonstrated the behaviors, the skills, and do they have the potential to be successful here?
Yeah. Yeah. I think the biggest, and we talk about this a lot, is in terms of ingraining culture into systems is the core values. And you touched on that a little bit.
Yeah.
Often they're sitting on the website. Maybe people have gone and looked at them. Most people don't know them, or don't even know that they exist once they're in the company. I think it's more common now for candidates to go look at core values, which I think is really great.
Yeah.
But then they're not ingrained into systems. So we have a whole document that's sort of a core values audit job aid, and I'll actually Favor is here from my team and she can drop it in the chat, but it's sort of take your core values of collaboration, define it as a competency, right? And then you need to ingrain it into people need to be measured on that in their interview. How are they tell me about a time you collaborated or felt you couldn't collaborate. What did you do?
Right.
And then and then outside of the interview, it has to go into other systems. So performance management, are people actually held accountable to the core values and those competencies? But they're often not defined. I see a lot. And it's a lot of integrity, innovation, respect, collaboration, and teamwork.
Right.
But it's just one word, right? And so it's, first you need with the team define what that looks like here. And then look at every single system, your policies, how you recruit, onboard, how you fire people if they're not living the values. And that is, I think, the biggest tool that is missed in organizational culture. That, your 5 core values, it can be you can make them so tangible. Just put them in there, ask questions about them, and get creative with it and see if you can have. So that's, I think, part of that's like the culture, one layer of culture add, right? Yeah. Do these values align? And then also, you don't want, like you said, everyone sort of thinking the same way. Like how did they attack?
And it's, and to your point, you see often that, there's these buzzwords, right, of teamwork or whatever the values might be. It's one word. It's oftentimes undefined from an organizational standpoint. But then they're not putting their money where their mouth is, right? They're not actually, they say they want teamwork, they want, a collaborative environment. But then really, the owner, the president, whoever, the CEO, what they say goes at the end of the day, right? And it's, they'll bring on people, but they, when they get their subject matter experts' opinion and they say, yeah, I see your point, but we're going to do it my way anyway. And, that goes to a leadership standpoint. And that I think, candidates, I think, also need to, again, an interview should be a two-way street. And, you kind of want to know what you're walking into if you're going to be pouring, 40 plus hours a week into an organization and, you're brought on for this certain skill set and then it's brushed under the rug, more often than not. Right.
Yeah, I know. And we're kind of coming to an end here. But so we just one quick story. We had a organization did a survey. They didn't have core values and people were really burnt out. And so they wanted work-life balance, and we helped create core values, one of them being, work-life balance. And then we, again, went in and it's like, okay, now these are the core values that you've agreed to, leadership. Let's look at your systems. And they couldn't have an out of office when they were on PTO, an out of office email on PTO. And then they had their reward. They had sort of this bonus reward, right? And it was tied to compensation, but you could only get it if you, worked 12 hours overnight, stayed the night in the office to get something done. And it's just like, that's where it's like, you can have them, but if you're not living them either.
Right. Yeah. There's oftentimes disconnects and that, again, ultimately will lead to turnovers and incivility in the workplace and, a toxic work culture that, brings us all back to square one of you're just hiring more people again.
Yeah. You're just keep going. And it's just, Okay, so we're coming to the end. I guess my last question is, if you had one piece of advice, given where you are around recruiting and culture, like what piece of advice would you want to give to people?
I think, I think the biggest one is kind of what I said, right? It's, turnover is not a retention problem. To me, it's an alignment problem. It's a selection problem. And so, I think the more intentional and structured you are during the hiring process, the fewer surprises you're going to have down the road. And so, being really, really mindful around what that process looks like, crafting those questions ahead of time. I can't tell you how many owner operators that, they just kind of shoot from the hip. They're just like feeling the person out. And it's like, no. You can't evaluate somebody that you're having one conversation with versus, a candidate for the same exact role that you have a completely different conversation with. Right. So you need that framework in place. And then get to know the person, right? Beyond just the resume.
Yeah.
That to me is, the most important thing that any hiring manager can do.
Yeah. Intention and framework. It's those systems. That's what that's where the hill we're going to die on, Nick, together.
Yeah, all day long, all day.
Well, thank you so much for coming on our show. I'll call it Culture Forward. And thank you everyone for watching and attending.
I love it. Thanks so much.
All right.